I want to share a story real quick. But a few years ago, I found myself in a situation that I find myself in a lot of times, and that is completely unaware of what time it is. Anybody find themselves in that situation? Apparently now, there's people that actually claim that they are incapable of understanding or comprehending time, and so you can't get onto them for that. I haven't convinced my wife of this yet, that's the case. But I'm kind of one of those people that if I'm doing something or I'm talking to somebody, my mind is kind of on that thing or 1,000 other things, and I don't really understand what time it is. And some of you are new and you're going, does that mean you're not going to end on time? No, we'll end on time. Somebody will turn off my mic and it'll be over and it'll be okay. But a few years ago, I found myself in a very similar situation I find myself in a lot of times. And that is that I didn't understand that work was over and it was time that I should have left work a while ago and should be on my way home. And I get a text message, and it's one that I would receive quite a bit. I try not to get it as much anymore, but it was one that I would get, and it would be from Lindsay, and she would go, "Where are you?" And she didn't have to say anything else. I don't have to know anything else. All I know is at that moment, I am late. I should have left a while ago. She's probably getting something ready. We're probably going somewhere, and I'm not going to be there on time to get there. And so, So what do I need to do? I need to run. I need to run because I'm going to be in trouble. All right? So I find myself that I'm running. I grab all my stuff. I go out to my car and I drive away. But here's the problem. In my running, I found myself doing some things that are not very smart. See, I had a silver car at the time. You're like, who cares what color car it is? I had a silver car, a very small little GTI that it seemed like it was going fast. It was fun to drive or whatever, and I could get home really quick in it. Silver car. And in my running away and running from my problems and trying to get out of my problems, I set my computer on top of my car. Anybody want to guess what color the computer was? It was silver. And so I set the silver laptop on top of the car. I get in the car. I don't realize that the computer is still there, but I'm out as quick as I can. Somehow it managed to stay on the roof of my car through the parking lot, leaving the parking lot, until I turn onto a familiar road for many of us around here, John Young Parkway. And I turn right on John Young Parkway and I punch it. And it's a small, quick little car. And the moment that I do, I hear this scratch on the top of the car. And then I look, and out the window, there's this thing going, psh, psh. I pull over and I walk over and I find that my computer is completely shattered. And this is exactly what happens to us so many times in life, is that when we are on the run, when we are running from something, that our life ends up, or things in our life end up shattered. And I don't know about you, but I want to ask the question, what in your life is shattered right now? And maybe there's nothing, but what would, to the world, what appears shattered in your world? This morning, I want to look at this idea that even though some people might think we could be on the run, that God might have a different plan for us, and that we weren't supposed to be shattered, but we could be scattered. And you go, oh, that doesn't sound like a good thing. It will be, I promise. But we're going to open up to the book of Acts, and if you would, go to the chapter 8. And so a few months ago, we kind of walked through the first chapters of Acts, and we looked at what would it look like for my life to be reimagined the way that it would personally in the book of Acts. And now for the next few weeks, what I want to do is I want to look at the book of Acts and go, this is church. And this is kind of the descriptive look at what church looked like. And then I want to take a look at, well, what does church in our modern day Western kind of world look like? And where's the disconnect? And so where we pick up in chapter 8 today, we're going to pick up, and this is right after there was a man named Stephen And he was a great man of God. He was a faithful man of God, and he was proclaiming Jesus. And because he was proclaiming Jesus, there were some people that came against him and said that you are blaspheming. You are saying things against God because you're saying that Jesus is God, and we don't like that. And so they took Stephen and they murdered him. They killed him. And as he was killed, there was another man that was there, and he was kind of giving his approval to the entire process. That man's name was Saul. And so if you would read with me in chapter 8, verse 1, and we will start there. Verse 1, it says, "On that day, a great persecution broke out against the church in Jerusalem, and all except the apostles were scattered throughout Judea and Samaria. Godly men buried Stephen and mourned deeply for him. But Saul began to destroy the church. Going from house to house, he dragged off both men and women and put them in prison. And those who had been scattered preached the word wherever they went. Philip went down to a city in Samaria and proclaimed the Messiah there. And when the crowds heard Philip and saw the signs that he performed, they all paid close attention to what he said. For with shrieks, impure spirits came out of many, and many who were paralyzed or lame were healed. So there was great joy in that city." So in the moment, in the book of Acts, I think sometimes we feel like we're being persecuted, and no, we're not being persecuted like in many other countries in the world right now. Like, people aren't coming after us and trying to murder us. But I do feel like more and more, it feels like the culture is against Christians, right? The culture is against things that Jesus would proclaim, that the Bible would proclaim as truth and say, that's not true, that's bigotry, that's hatred, that's angry. They would come against that. And so because of that, it feels more and more like, hey, there's people coming against us. There's culture coming against us. This enemy is coming against me, and I feel like I am under attack. And in chapter 8, we see that on that day, a great persecution broke out against the church in Jerusalem. And all except the apostles were scattered throughout Judea and Samaria. Now, I don't know about you, but if you grew up in church, you probably heard something like this, that, you know what? If God is not opposing something, or if Satan is not opposing something, the enemy is not opposing something, it must mean that God's not in it. It must mean that God's not doing something. Because if God was doing something, then the enemy would oppose it. Now, I don't want to preach against that statement, because I've seen time and time again that yes, when God is doing something, yes, the enemy attacks. But I think sometimes we look at this and go, well, hold on. Maybe there's more to this than just what meets the eye. And so when we say that on that day a great persecution broke out against the church in Jerusalem, this persecution is happening when? Right after Stephen's death. This persecution is happening right in this time of great and deep mourning. See, the people are at this emotionally and spiritually maybe weak time. And that's when the enemy goes, there's blood in the water. There's fear in the water. And I'm going to attack. You go, that sounds pretty crazy. That sounds like pretty vicious. Well, if we call Satan our enemy, if we call him the enemy, well, what's an enemy do? They're an enemy. They attack. And in 1 Peter 5:8, this is what it says. It says that we should be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. And so, okay, well, when does the enemy attack? When does the enemy attack? Is it when you're strong? Is it when you're weak? When does the enemy attack? The enemy attacks always. Always. The enemy is always after you. The enemy is always looking for some sort of weakness in your life. Be alert. Sober mind, your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Resist him, standing firm in the faith, because you know that the family of believers throughout the world is undergoing the same kind of sufferings. You're not under attack because you are just some sort of special person that has more gifting than anyone else in the world spiritually. You're not under attack because you're the weakest Christian in the world and you have nothing to offer. You are under attack because you are part of the family of God. In this family all across the world, we have this in common, that we have the same enemy. And he comes at us in different ways, using our weaknesses against us. It's the same kind of sufferings. Verse 10, and the God of all grace, who called you to his eternal glory in Christ, after you have suffered a little while, will himself restore you and make you strong. Now, let me point out that it doesn't say he will restore you and make you rich. He will restore you and make you perfectly healthy and have no health issues the rest of your life. That's not the promise. I think if we live according to God's principles and his ways, that we will see his blessing in our life. But please tell me that our spiritual family in Syria and in Lebanon aren't being just as faithful as we are. What will we tell them if they're not becoming rich because of their Christian faith? It doesn't add up, right? See, we live for an eternal glory, an eternal blessing. Then we live according to his principles and go, all right, God, if you bless me like I believe you would, then you bless me. But if not, I'm still going to be faithful. Because when you restore me, you're going to restore me and make me strong. You're going to make me firm and steadfast. See, sometimes the enemy is looking for that weakness of defeat. And so in our world, in this Western culture, in America, what we see is the enemy attacks so many times because we have fallen victim, we have fallen into this trap of sin. And that might be sin of anger. It might be sin of greed. It might be sin of lust. It could be a lot of different things, but we see the enemy coming after us in that weakness. And then we go, oh, woe is me. We were built on a firm foundation of Christian values in this country, and what does it become? And we go, politics, will you save me? And it won't. I'm not saying you shouldn't be involved in politics. I'm just saying it can't be your God. But what's happening here is we go, but the culture is being pulled out from under us, and now they're against us, and they're winning, and so now Satan is going to come and attack. And how we respond is up to us. He's going to look for a weakness of anxiety and go, oh, these anxious people are here? Let me just make them more anxious. Let me just give them more reason to be anxious. Global pandemic? Check. Inflation? Check. Politicians that go crazy everywhere? Check. My kid's going to such and such school and I don't know this and I don't know that. Check. You go ahead and get anxiety. I'm a teacher and I've got to deal with kids and I'm not allowed to actually do anything about it anymore. Check. Like, well, you name it, whatever it is. Attack. Attack. That's where he's going to attack. Little faith. I don't know if God's going to come through. Ooh. Let's show him how much he's not going to come through. Attack. And so Satan uses our weaknesses to attack. But here's one thing I want us to always keep in mind, is that while the enemy is always looking to devour us, sometimes we feel like it's the enemy opposing us, and yet it's not. It's actually God opposing us. And so sometimes we have this weakness of success in our life. And another way of saying it is we have a weakness of pride in our life that God might oppose. But that's not the case here in the book of Acts. We don't see that God is opposing them, but we see that God is using Satan's attack for his own good, for his own glory. And so we see in here that there's this man named Saul and that he approves of everything that is going on. And in our world, we have people that will approve of all of the attacks against Christians. They deserve that. Haven't you seen the way they treated those people in the 1990s? Didn't you see the oppression they put on that race back in the 60s and the 50s? They deserve that. And you have people that will now go, they were sin, they were wrong, or go, I just disagree with them and I'm opposed to them. And what happens is we've got people that are approving our defeat. And in the approval of defeat, we can do something, and that is run. Run. Run for the hills. Go somewhere, live in a monastery somewhere, and you can hide out and live a peaceful life away from no one. Or instead, you don't have to do that. You can just go live your entire life in Netflix binging. That's all you do. You can live your life just on wine and hanging and drinking a lot of wine every night until you drink your cares away. You can do a lot of things to numb the pain, to numb the anxiety, to make it feel like it should be gone while the world is approving. But a lot of times we find ourselves, we're running somewhere, somehow. And as they buried Stephen, this big deal, they're mourning. They're hurt. And now they're afraid. And it says that they're scattered. And it says Saul began to destroy the church or ravage the church. And how did he do it? He was going from house to house. See, in the book of Acts, the church was a people, it wasn't a building. It was a family. It wasn't a place. And this family met in homes, and the family would go to the temple courts, and they would hear the apostles' teaching, and they would pray together there, and they would hang out there. But then they would, day by day, be in each other's homes, living next to them, sharing with them, encouraging them. That's how the early church went, and it was. And so Saul and his people are going house to house and dragging off both men and women and putting them in prison. Now, here's something I want to encourage you. Because, see, we serve a God of peace, but we also serve a just God and a God of power. And so what you see here is you see a people that are being dragged off to prison, and you go, that's terrible. But here's something I do want to encourage you. It says they were dragged off. It doesn't say that they were scared and they walked into prison because they just gave up. That means you might be tempted in your life to just run from some of your problems. You might be tempted when the enemy comes against you that you just run. But the answer isn't always running. Doesn't mean you won't face pain. Doesn't mean you won't face persecution. Doesn't mean you won't face consequences. But the answer isn't always to run. Sometimes the answer is to stand firm and let people drag you off. And in America, that doesn't mean that they're going to drag you off by the arms. It means that they're probably going to drag you off by dragging your name through the mud. Your character, your integrity through the mud. But you can stand firm. You can let them drag you. But be who God has called you to be. And then those who had been scattered preached the word wherever they went. They preached the word wherever they went. Now, here's something that I want to get to in just a minute, but let me ask you this question first. Where has God scattered you to? In your times of running, or in times of maybe pain, or maybe just in times of decision making, you've ended up in a certain place. But where has God scattered you? And some of you,